Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I pray that Allah grants you a heart that is alive, a tongue that remembers Him, and eyes that recognize His blessings, even in the smallest moments. May this day be a step toward becoming the person Allah wants you to be. The first habit that slowly kills the spiritual heart is too much talking, and its impact is far deeper than many people realize. When a person becomes accustomed to constant speech, commenting on everything, reacting to everything, filling silence with noise, the heart begins to lose its softness. Talking excessively is not simply about the number of words. It is about losing the ability to pause before speaking, to think before responding, and to choose words that carry purpose. Dr. Haifaa often reminds us that the tongue is a mirror of the heart. When the heart is occupied with remembrance, reflection, and awareness of Allah, the tongue naturally becomes restrained. But when the heart is distracted, the tongue becomes unguarded, speaking without intention or benefit. Too much talking dulls the senses of the heart because it pushes a person outward, toward others, toward the world, toward opinions and reactions, rather than inward, towards self-awareness and accountability. When someone talks constantly, they leave no space for listening, observing, or learning, and a heart that does not listen cannot grow. Much of spirituality is rooted in silence, not because silence itself is worship, but because silence gives space for the soul to breathe. In silence, a person can hear the whispers of their conscience, the truth of their struggles, and the subtle reminders Allah places within them. Excess talking covers all of this with noise. Another danger of too much talking is that it often leads to careless speech. A person who talks a lot becomes more likely to fall into backbiting, complaining, exaggeration, or even lying, sometimes without realizing it. And every word carries weight with Allah. The Prophet said that a person may say one word, thinking nothing of it, but that word can bring Allah's displeasure and throw them into the fire. This is not simply a warning. It is a reminder that speech is a trust. When the tongue is unrestrained, the heart becomes desensitized to the seriousness of what it produces. Excessive talking also weakens the ability to engage in deep remembrance. Dhikr requires presence. Quran requires attentiveness. Dua requires humility. When the mind is constantly engaged in outward conversation, inner connection becomes harder. A person might find themselves unable to focus in prayer, unable to reflect during recitation, or unable to feel the sweetness of worship. The heart becomes overstimulated, tired, and noisy because it mirrors the tongue. Dr. Haifaa often mentions that one of the signs of a spiritually alive heart is the ability to enjoy moments of calm and remembrance. But a heart trained by constant talking becomes restless in silence. It feels uncomfortable when not speaking, showing how far it has drifted from inner stillness. Too much talking also feeds the ego. Speaking frequently can make a person feel important, knowledgeable, or central in every discussion. The ego loves the sound of its own voice. It pushes a person to comment, to argue, to be noticed, but spiritual growth requires humility. The more a person talks, the more they risk opinions settling in their heart as certainty. even when they are wrong. Silence, on the other hand, nurtures humility. It allows a person to admit they don't know, to accept that not every thought must be shared, and to focus on improving themselves rather than correcting others. Ultimately, too much talking can distance the heart from Allah because it fills the inner space with the world. When the tongue is constantly moving, the heart rarely remembers its true purpose. But when a person learns to restrain their speech, to choose words with care, and to embrace silence with comfort, they create space for sincerity, reflection, and closeness to Allah to flourish. The second habit that quietly damages the spiritual heart is constant complaining, a behavior that seems harmless, but slowly shapes a person's outlook, weakens their faith, and clouds their ability to see Allah's blessings. Complaining does not only refer to expressing difficulty or asking for help. Those are human and sometimes necessary. What harms the heart is the habitual negativity that becomes a person's default reaction to life. When one constantly focuses on what is missing, what went wrong, or what others have done, they train their heart to see disappointment before blessings and problems before opportunities. This mindset slowly disconnects the heart from gratitude, which is one of the most powerful acts of worship and one of the greatest sources of peace. Dr. Haifaa often reminds us that the believer sees through the lens of Allah's mercy, not through the lens of hardship. When someone complains excessively, they unintentionally reject this lens. Instead of acknowledging the wisdom behind a difficulty, they magnify the discomfort. Instead of recognizing Allah's care in what is withheld, they feel deprived. Over time, the heart becomes conditioned to dissatisfaction. Even when Allah gives them ease, they might still find a reason to be unhappy, because the heart has learned to complain more than it has learned to appreciate. The danger of constant complaining is that it narrows a person's vision. It turns them inward, not in a reflective or constructive way, but in a self-centered way where everything becomes about my struggle, my inconvenience, and my frustration. This kind of inward focus blinds the heart from seeing the millions of blessings surrounding it. It also prevents a person from noticing the experiences and struggles of others. The more someone complains, the more they drown in their own narrative, losing the humility that comes from recognizing that everyone is tested, everyone suffers, and everyone experiences moments of weakness. A complaining heart often forgets that Allah never burdens a soul beyond what it can bear. Another problem with habitual complaining is that it weakens tawakkul, the deep trust in Allah's plan that brings serenity and strength. Every complaint is a moment where the heart resists what Allah has written, even if subconsciously. It says, in essence, this should not have happened, or I deserve something different. Over time, this resistance builds a barrier between the servant and their Lord, because trust is not simply a belief. It is an attitude. It is shown through acceptance, patience, and an inner calmness that acknowledges Allah's wisdom even when things are difficult. A heart that trusts cannot complain excessively, because trust naturally leads to contentment. complaining also affects the people around us, influencing their hearts as well. A person who complains often spreads negativity, anxiety, and emotional heaviness in their environment. They drain others and weaken the spiritual atmosphere. Constant complaining can even lead to unhealthy relationships, where conversations revolve around frustrations, gossip, or comparisons. These patterns distance the heart from goodness and plant seeds of resentment, jealousy, and self-pity, qualities that suffocate spiritual growth. On the other hand, refraining from complaining nurtures strength. It teaches the heart to look for lessons instead of losses, solutions instead of suffering. It cultivates shukr, a gratitude that opens the doors to more blessings. It softens the heart, making it more aware of Allah's mercy and more connected to His plan. Dr. Haifaa often encourages believers to transform their complaints into dua, because dua cleans the heart while complaining hardens it. When a person learns to turn to Allah with their pain, instead of constantly voicing it to people, they find relief, clarity, and spiritual elevation. In this shift lies the protection of the heart and the foundation of true spiritual resilience. The third habit that slowly harms the spiritual heart is constant comparison, a behavior that steals contentment, fuels insecurity, and distracts the believer from their unique journey with Allah. Comparison may seem subtle. It begins with observing others, noticing what they have or how they live. But when it becomes frequent, it turns into a silent poison that reshapes how a person sees themselves, their life, and their Lord. Dr. Haifaa often reminds us that every individual has a different path, different tests, and different blessings. When comparison becomes a habit, the heart forgets this fundamental truth and starts believing that value is measured by what others possess rather than what Allah has given. The problem with comparison is that it shifts the heart's focus outward instead of inward. Instead of reflecting on personal growth, mistakes, or opportunities for improvement, the mind becomes occupied with other people, their achievements, their families, their homes, their appearance, their spirituality. The heart becomes restless, constantly measuring itself against unrealistic or incomplete pictures. What people show on the outside is rarely the full story, yet comparison convinces the heart that others have more ease, more beauty, more blessings, or more success. This perception plants seeds of dissatisfaction, slowly pulling the heart away from gratitude. Comparison also undermines one's ability to see Allah's individualized plan. The believer's journey is crafted with precision. Every challenge is tailored to their strength, every blessing aligned with their needs, every delay carrying wisdom. When a person compares their story to someone else's, they question this divine tailoring. They begin to feel that Allah favored others more or blessed them less. This is not only untrue, but spiritually damaging. It weakens trust, disrupts contentment, and leads to misunderstanding the nature of divine distribution. Dr. Haifaa often reminds her audience that the real measure of success is not having what others have, but fulfilling the purpose Allah has written uniquely for you. Another danger of comparison is that it feeds the ego. A person might compare themselves to others and feel superior, which breeds arrogance, or they may feel inferior, which breeds envy. Both states harm the heart. Arrogance creates blindness, blocking humility and sincere introspection. Envy darkens the heart, making it resentful of Allah's blessings upon others. Over time, comparison transforms from a passing thought into a constant emotional battle, leaving the person spiritually exhausted, distracted, and disconnected from inner peace. Perhaps the most damaging effect of comparison is that it robs the heart of authenticity. When someone constantly looks at others to define success, beauty, or happiness, they begin to lose themselves. Their intentions shift. They might worship to be seen as religious like someone else, work to compete with someone else, or pursue goals only because others have achieved them. This dilutes sincerity, replacing pure intention with the desire for validation. Sincerity, ikhlas, is the heart of every act of worship. When comparison influences intention, the spiritual heart weakens. The antidote to comparison is deep self-awareness and sincere gratitude. Recognizing that Allah knows what is best for every soul, and that no blessing is too small when it is given with divine wisdom. When a person focuses on their own journey, their progress, their struggles, and their relationship with Allah, they reclaim their peace. They learn to appreciate what they have without viewing others as competition or threats. Dr. Haifaa often emphasizes that spiritual growth is personal and should never be measured against others. You are not meant to be like anyone else. You are meant to be the best version of the soul Allah entrusted you with. And when the heart accepts this truth, comparison loses its power and contentment begins to blossom. The fourth habit that gradually weakens the spiritual heart is being overly attached to worldly desires, a pattern that often begins innocently but slowly shifts the heart away from its true purpose. Worldly attachments are not limited to wealth or possessions. They include anything that occupies the heart excessively: status, beauty, comfort, entertainment, or even relationships. When these attachments become dominant, the heart starts to lose its balance. Dr. Haifaa often emphasizes that the problem is not in enjoying the blessings of this world, but in allowing those blessings to take a place in the heart that belongs only to Allah. The danger of strong worldly attachment is that it creates dependency. When the heart becomes dependent on something temporary, it becomes fragile. It fears loss, craves more, and feels unsettled when desires are not fulfilled. This instability makes the heart vulnerable to disappointment and emotional turmoil. Instead of standing firm with trust and resilience, the heart becomes reactive, rising and falling based on what it gains or loses in the dunya. A heart tied too tightly to worldly things can never experience true tranquility, because it is always afraid of losing what it loves. Excessive attachment also clouds spiritual vision. When the heart is full of dunya, it becomes difficult to feel the sweetness of worship, the peace of dhikr, or the depth of the Quran. The heart becomes distracted, pulled in too many directions, unable to focus on what truly brings closeness to Allah. Even acts of worship can become shallow when the heart is preoccupied with worldly concerns. Instead of praying with presence, the mind drifts to tasks, desires, or worries. Instead of giving with sincerity, one may give for recognition. This dilution of intention weakens the connection between servant and creator. Worldly attachment also breeds constant longing. The more one gets, the more one wants. This endless chase drains the soul, leaving little room for contemplation or gratitude. Dr. Haifaa often explains that the heart was created to seek the eternal. When it tries to fill itself with the temporary, it feels a void that nothing in the dunya can satisfy. This void is the spiritual heart's cry, a reminder that it is yearning for Allah, not for accumulation, status, or pleasure. Another impact of dunya attachment is that it shapes identity around external measure rather than inner worth. A person may begin to evaluate themselves based on wealth, appearance, achievements, or social approval. This leads to insecurity because these standards constantly shift and are never truly fulfilled. It also leads to comparison and envy, poisoning the heart further. True balance comes when the heart uses the dunya without being owned by it. When a person appreciates blessings without attaching their happiness to them, they gain freedom. They live with gratitude, not greed. They pursue goals, but with the intention of pleasing Allah, not satisfying the ego. This is the state of a spiritually alive heart. One that enjoys the world as a traveler, not as someone who sees it as a permanent home. The fifth habit that deeply harms the spiritual heart is surrounding yourself with negative or spiritually draining company. The people a person spends time with shape their thoughts, influence their emotions, and leave an imprint on their heart, often without them realizing it. Dr. Haifaa frequently reminds her listeners of the prophetic teaching. A person is upon the religion, attitude, and character of their close companions. This means that the heart absorbs the environment around it as easily as a sponge absorbs water. When the company is uplifting, sincere, and mindful of Allah, the heart grows in light. But when the company is negative, careless, or distant from Allah, the heart slowly adopts the same traits. One of the greatest dangers of negative company is that it normalizes actions that harm the soul. When a person is surrounded by people who gossip, complain, engage in backbiting, mock others, or waste time, these habits begin to feel ordinary. The heart becomes less sensitive to sin and less aware of the need for repentance or caution. What once felt uncomfortable slowly becomes familiar. This quiet shift is what makes the influence of companions so powerful. They can change a person not through advice, but through atmosphere. A believer who wants to protect their spiritual heart must be conscious of emotional and behavioral influences, because the heart is always absorbing something, for better or worse. Negative company also weakens motivation. When someone tries to improve spiritually, to pray on time, wake up for Fajr, recite Quran, dress modestly, or avoid harmful speech, but is surrounded by people who do not value these goals, they will eventually feel discouraged or isolated. Humans are naturally influenced by their surroundings. If the environment lacks spiritual encouragement, the heart begins to lose momentum. Acts of worship feel heavier, bad habits feel more persistent. Even one's standards begin to shift. Dr. Haifaa often emphasizes that spirituality cannot flourish in an environment that suffocates it. Just as a plant cannot survive without sunlight, the heart cannot thrive without the company that nurtures it. Another impact of harmful company is its ability to feed the ego. Being around individuals who constantly compete, compare, judge, or seek validation creates an atmosphere of insecurity. The ego becomes more active, always worried about being seen, approved of, or admired. This shifts intentions away from sincerity. A person may start doing good deeds to fit in, gain praise, or avoid criticism. This spiritual corruption is subtle but dangerous because sincerity is the essence of worship. Without it, actions lose their value. Good company, on the other hand, pushes a person toward humility, reminding them that their worth is with Allah, not with people. Negative company also influences one's emotional state. People who constantly complain, dramatize everything, or dwell on negativity affect the emotional balance of those around them. Their pessimism becomes contagious. Over time, the heart becomes heavier, more anxious, and less hopeful. This emotional heaviness blocks the sweetness of remembrance and the lightness of trust in Allah. The heart begins to see life through a darker lens, forgetting Allah's mercy and missing His signs. On the opposite side, surrounding oneself with righteous, mindful, and positive individuals enriches the heart in ways one can feel immediately. Their presence reminds you of Allah, even if no words are exchanged. Their discipline motivates you. Their kindness softens you. Their sincerity inspires you. Good company lifts your standard and protects your heart from drifting. It pushes you toward becoming the best version of yourself. This is why Dr. Haifaa says that companionship is not a small matter. It is a spiritual choice that determines the heart's direction. A spiritually alive heart chooses company carefully, knowing that who sits next to you can either pull you closer to Allah or slowly turn you away from Him. The sixth habit that slowly kills the spiritual heart is ignoring regular self-reflection, a behavior that allows mistakes to grow, intentions to weaken, and the heart to drift without realizing it. Self-reflection, muhasaba, is a practice deeply embedded in Islamic spirituality. It is the act of pausing, looking inward, and asking, where am I in my relationship with Allah? What am I doing with my time? What is happening in my heart? When a person abandons this essential habit, the heart becomes clouded with distractions, sins, and emotional clutter. Dr. Haifaa often stresses that the heart does not become hard overnight. It becomes hard slowly, through neglect. And neglect always begins when a person stops holding themselves accountable. Without self-reflection, the heart becomes vulnerable to unnoticed spiritual decline. Missing a prayer may start to feel normal. Reciting Qur'an becomes occasional. Sins no longer feel heavy. Even good deeds lose their sweetness. The person may still appear religious on the outside, but inside, the heart becomes numb. This numbness is one of the most dangerous states a believer can reach. Because when the heart no longer feels its distance from Allah, it lacks the motivation to return. Regular reflection protects against this by keeping the heart awake, sensitive, and aware of its own condition. Another danger of ignoring reflection is that intentions become corrupted over time. Actions that once were done sincerely, for Allah alone, can slowly shift toward pleasing people, seeking validation, or feeding the ego. A person may start praying so others see them, giving charity for praise, or pursuing knowledge for recognition. Without pausing to analyze one's intentions, these shifts go undetected. The heart becomes filled with hidden internal issues: arrogance, self-admiration, competitiveness, while the person remains unaware. Self-reflection shines a light on these inner problems, allowing the believer to purify their intentions before they affect the heart deeply. Lack of reflection also causes a person to repeat the same mistakes. Without examining their actions, they fail to understand the triggers behind their sins or the patterns behind their weaknesses. They may constantly fall into anger, envy, or bad habits without knowing why. Reflection allows a person to identify these patterns and confront them by asking, "Why did I react this way? Why do I keep returning to this sin? What am I avoiding?" The heart becomes equipped to grow. Without this, the heart stays stuck in cycles that drain it spiritually. Ignoring self-reflection makes the heart overly attached to the dunya. When the believer does not pause to evaluate priorities, the world naturally takes over. Time is spent on entertainment rather than dhikr, desires rather than discipline, comfort rather than worship. The dunya becomes louder and Allah's remembrance becomes quieter. Dr. Haifaa often reminds us that the heart does not remain empty. If we do not fill it with remembrance, it will fill itself with distractions. Reflection acts as a filter. It helps remove the unnecessary and renew what truly matters. A heart deprived of reflection also loses humility. It becomes convinced that everything is fine, that no correction is needed, that growth is optional. This leads to spiritual arrogance, the belief that one is already good enough. But humility comes from recognizing one's flaws and weaknesses, and one cannot recognize them without honest self-assessment. Reflection softens the heart by reminding it of its mistakes, its dependence on Allah, and its constant need for His mercy. When a believer regularly reflects, they remain aware of their spiritual state, protect their sincerity, and stay grounded in humility. But when reflection is ignored, the heart becomes lost, busy on the outside, empty on the inside.